Grandpa isn't here.
It's been a year since my husband passed away. The memorial service for his first death anniversary had concluded without issue, and as we stood before his grave, my 5-year-old granddaughter suddenly said those words. A casual remark from a child of her age. At the time, I didn't think it held any special meaning whatsoever. However, to my surprise, my sister-in-law began trembling uncontrollably upon hearing those words. At the same time, my son-in-law, standing beside her, inexplicably turned pale and tried to cover his daughter's mouth.
Grandpa is far away, by the sea.
Brushing off her father's hand, my granddaughter continued to speak. Her words brought to mind the mysterious power passed down through our family. And in that moment, I instinctively knew this was no ordinary matter. I am Maria, 65 years old. In my younger days, I worked as a middle school music teacher and married my colleague 40 years ago. After we both retired, we began enjoying a peaceful and carefree life in retirement. The cornerstone of our hearts was our only daughter Kelly and her family. My husband and I had intended to spend the rest of our lives calmly, watching over them from close by. But never did I imagine that our peaceful life would suddenly come to an end. At that time, I could not have foreseen the tragedy that would later engulf us. It was about a year ago when my cheerful husband suddenly became withdrawn. No matter how much I asked what was wrong, he would only repeat, "It's nothing." Then one day, without saying where he was going, he left the house and disappeared. I was so worried that I couldn't eat for days. About a month after filing a report with the police, I received the news that a body resembling my husband had been found in the mountains. I wanted to rush there immediately, but I couldn't. The shock overwhelmed me, and I collapsed, ending up in the hospital in an ambulance. It was my daughter and son-in-law who went to confirm the identity in my place.
The man who fell from the cliff and passed away is undoubtedly your husband.
Hearing this devastating truth from Brian, my son-in-law, was unbearable. I had convinced myself that my husband would come back, and I simply couldn't accept it. Oh, my love. How did it come to this? Afterward, Brian took charge of all the funeral arrangements on my behalf. To my shame, I was so mentally and physically exhausted that I couldn't leave the hospital bed. Eventually, after crying all my tears dry, I lost the will to live and even thought of following my husband. But it was Brian who gently reached out to me.
Maria, why don't you come live with us from now on? It's heartbreaking, but if you stay in despair, it will only worry your husband in heaven.
That's right, Maria. You need to recover for Kelly's sake too. I'll help in any way I can.
Joining Brian in encouraging me was my husband's sister, Kathy. Her tearful plea, as someone who had also lost a beloved family member, moved my heart. You're right. From now on, I need to live fully, for his sake too. I took refuge in my daughter and son-in-law's home, as if running from the harsh reality. Brian is a skilled entrepreneur who runs several restaurants. Kelly, a pastry chef, manages one of his stores, a cake shop. In their busy lives, they entrusted me with taking care of their daughter, Beth. Beth, 5 years old and in her final year of preschool, resembled my late husband in both her looks and demeanor. Being with her brought me a sense of peace. With the support of my family, I gradually began to regain my strength. Time passed, and a year had gone by since my husband passed away. The memorial service for his first death anniversary had concluded without issue, and our family headed to his grave. Beth, seeing a cemetery for the first time, looked curious. Thinking back, she had caught a cold on the day of my husband's funeral and stayed in the hospital with me.
Why are there so many stones here?
This is a cemetery. Your grandpa is resting here too. Placing the flower and offering a prayer at the grave, memories of my husband during his vibrant days began flooding back. My love. I still can't believe it. Why did you leave me all alone like this? Overcome with sorrow, tears welled up in my eyes. But then, something unbelievable happened.
Grandpa isn't here.
Beth suddenly shouted loudly. I wiped my tears and turned around, startled. Her serious gaze met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw my husband's expression reflected in her eyes.
No, Grandpa is far away, by the sea.
What? What do you mean by that? But before she could respond, Brian interrupted.
Beth, stop saying weird things.
He hurriedly tried to cover her mouth. I turned my gaze to him, sensing something off. His face was pale as a sheet. But it wasn't just him. Kathy, my sister-in-law standing beside him, also looked unnaturally tense and was trembling. Hey, both of you seem strange. What's going on? Brian forced a strange smile.
Oh, it's just something from an anime. She must have seen it on TV and is mimicking it, right, Beth?
His flimsy excuse only deepened my suspicion. For one, Brian was always home late and wouldn't know what shows Beth watched. On top of that, I usually watched TV with her, so if it were something from a show, I should have recognized it.
Maybe Beth is just sleepy?
Yeah, that could be it. Let's head back so she can take a nap.
No. I'm not sleepy. Grandpa isn't here, he's at the sea.
Hey! That's enough. Stop making things up, or you'll be in big trouble.
Shouted at by her father, Beth finally burst into tears. Brian, you don't have to be so harsh. She didn't mean any harm, did she? But Brian completely ignored me, picked Beth up, and rushed to the car without another word. Something's not right. On the drive home, as I watched my granddaughter's tear-streaked face, now peacefully asleep from exhaustion, a memory began to surface in my mind. It was something my husband had told me a long time ago. In my family, there are occasionally people who possess mysterious powers. These mysterious powers referred to the ability to see or sense things that ordinary people couldn't. My husband himself didn't have such abilities, and he mentioned that it was often the women in the family who did. Neither my daughter nor Kathy had those powers. Could it be that Beth saw something? The words my granddaughter had said, "Grandpa is far away, by the sea," came back to me, sending a chill down my spine. But no, that can't be. Something like that only happens in TV dramas. I shook my head vigorously, feeling embarrassed for even considering such an idea. I felt guilty toward Brian, who had supported me steadfastly since my husband's passing. I'll forget all about this and focus on moving forward from tomorrow. However, my resolve was short-lived. What unfolded next not only involved me but also dragged my granddaughter into an unexpected and strange turn of events. It happened a few days later when I went to pick Beth up from kindergarten.
Grandma, a bad person is coming this way.
Startled, I turned around and saw a car speeding directly toward us. Watch out! I instinctively grabbed Beth and jumped into an alley. We narrowly escaped, and as I looked up, the car sped away. At that moment, I caught a glimpse of the faces of the people sitting in the driver's and passengers' seats. No way. I was overcome with shock.
Grandma, Grandpa is calling. He says to catch the bad people.
Once again, strange words came out of my granddaughter's mouth as she watched my trembling reaction. So Beth really can sense it. There's something behind my husband's accident, and this isn't over yet. Hugging Beth tightly with my trembling hands, I vowed to myself that I would never forgive the people who not only targeted me but also put my innocent granddaughter's life in danger. If that's the case, I'll uncover the truth. And I will protect Beth at all costs. Shaking with fury, I made a vow to my husband in heaven to bring justice to those responsible. That same day, I went to the home I used to share with my husband. It had been a year since I'd last been there, as I had moved in with my daughter's family soon after his passing. Overcome with nostalgia, I entered his study to go through his belongings. There, I discovered a journal he had kept during his life. Within its pages were truths I had never known. The journal ended with the words, "Tomorrow, I will reveal everything." So, this is what happened. It dawned on me that my husband might have foreseen what would happen to him and left this journal behind as a record. If that were true, I had to carry on his will. Determined to find evidence of the criminal's misdeeds, I took action. Later, I went to Kathy's small restaurant. I was in the neighborhood for an errand, so I thought I'd stop by. We spent about an hour reminiscing about my husband before I left the restaurant. A few days later, I made a decision. Beth, let's skip preschool today and go out together, I said after seeing my daughter and Brian off to work. Sensing something, Beth willingly followed my suggestion. We walked along the beach, visiting various places, and during that time, Beth's mysterious abilities proved incredibly helpful. Finally, I uncovered solid evidence of the criminal's wrongdoing. The next holiday, I left Beth at a friend's house and called my daughter, Brian, and Kathy to my husband's grave.
What's this about? Neither Kelly nor I have time for this. And neither does Kathy, obviously.
Brian grumbled in frustration, but I didn't let it bother me. You remember what Beth said the other day, don't you? Grandpa isn't here. He's far away, by the sea. I've figured out why. At that, Brian's face momentarily tensed. Kathy, too, looked visibly nervous.
I told you, it was just something from an anime.
No, that's not it. Beth knew. She knew the truth. That Grandpa isn't the one resting in this grave.
What are you even talking about? You're seriously taking the words of a little kid that literally? That's ridiculous.
Brian let out a disdainful snort and shrugged as if to say how absurd the situation was. But his reaction was so theatrical, it only fueled my suspicions further. Is it ridiculous? Beth has a special ability, one that's been passed down in my husband's family. Kathy, you know about it, don't you? I shifted my gaze to Kathy, who quickly looked away and stared at the ground.
Is that so? I don't really remember.
Don't pretend you don't know. That's why you were trembling so much that day.
No, that's not it. I was just scared because Beth said such creepy things. That's all.
When I gave her a meaningful look, she averted her eyes again. Her obvious panic confirmed my suspicions. That's not true, is it? Kathy, you realized Beth's power. That's why you and Brian tried to kill us with that car, isn't it? Kathy flinched, and next to her, Brian's face went deathly pale, his inability to mask his agitation glaringly apparent.
That's absurd. And so what if she has some so-called special ability? You can't prove that the person buried in this grave isn't your husband, can you?
Unfortunately for you, I already know. Brian raised his voice in protest, but I calmly interrupted him. Then, fixing both of them with a sharp glare, I let my words hang in the air. A year ago, on the day I was informed that my husband's body had been found in the mountains, it was my daughter and son-in-law who rushed to the scene. It was Brian who told the police that the body was undoubtedly my husband's. Kelly, however, never saw the face of the deceased. Brian had told her, "The damage is too severe, it's better if you don't look." I couldn't attend my husband's funeral, but I had asked Kelly to save a small lock of his hair for me. The man in the coffin had indeed suffered significant injuries, and his face was kept covered by a white cloth the entire time. Trusting that it was her father, Kelly had taken some hair as I requested, never doubting his identity. At the time, I never imagined it might not be my husband. I just wanted something of his to hold on to. However, that lock of hair turned out to be unexpectedly valuable. After hearing Beth's strange words and sensing something suspicious about my husband's accident, I had the hair tested for DNA. As I recounted this, it became clear that Brian and Kathy were growing even paler. This is the DNA test result. I placed the document before them. The report stated, with 100% certainty, that the hair did not belong to my husband. At this, my daughter asked, "Then, where did Dad go?" As Beth said, "Far away by the sea." My husband did not fall from a mountain. He was sunk in the sea. By someone's hand. I tracked down the location with Beth. It was a coastal area where my husband frequently went to sketch. As a former art teacher, he often spent his weekends painting at various spots. By comparing the landscapes from his sketches with the visions Beth described using her mysterious ability, we pinpointed the location. Though over a year had passed, and we couldn't find his body, the local police revealed that around the same time, an unidentified man had been found drowned. The man had already been cremated, but his clothes and belongings had been preserved. I immediately recognized the clothing and the watch, and among the items was also a wedding ring, identical in design to mine and engraved with the same date. When I showed the police a photo of my husband, they confirmed that the unidentified man was indeed my husband. Now you see, don't you? The person buried here is a complete stranger. My husband drowned in the sea. Hearing this, Brian averted his eyes nervously.
At the time, I was overwhelmed. I just assumed it was him. I'm terribly sorry.
He lowered his head in a hollow display of remorse.
Oh, come on, Maria. We were all in shock back then. It's no wonder Brian made a mistake. Don't be so hard on him.
Kathy, standing next to Brian, glared at me with an accusatory look as she tried to defend him. Watching their behavior, I couldn't help but laugh.
What's so funny?
It's just, you two are so ridiculously obvious.
What's that supposed to mean?
I'm saying I've had enough of this pathetic charade. I know everything. You two killed my husband, didn't you? At my direct accusation, Brian and Kathy visibly flinched. Their eyes widened, and beads of sweat quickly formed on their foreheads, dripping like waterfalls.
Come on now. Maria, you're letting your imagination run wild. What's gotten into you?
Don't insult my intelligence. It's all out in the open now. I know about your affair, and I know about Brian's financial troubles. I threw my husband's journal in front of them. It detailed how Brian had secretly begged my husband for money. Apparently, Brian had expanded his business but was drowning in debt due to unprofitable operations. Worried about our daughter, my husband had initially agreed to help Brian financially. However, he discovered the inappropriate relationship between Brian and Kathy, leading him to withdraw his support. The journal ended with the words, "Tomorrow, I will reveal everything." He must have been planning to tell Kelly and me the truth. Recalling how withdrawn my husband had been during that time, I felt tears welling up. Just then, Kelly grabbed my arm and nodded silently. I had confided everything to her the night before. Though devastated by the revelation of Brian and Kathy's affair, she resolved to help when she learned that her father's life had been taken and that Beth and I had been targeted. You panicked when my husband refused to lend you money, didn't you? That's when you decided to get rid of him. You had your eyes on the inheritance Kelly would receive from her father. Brian and Kathy trembled as they read the damning words in the journal. That day, Brian lured my husband to the sea with sweet words and pushed him off the cliff, didn't you? It was Beth who told me this. When we found the spot where my husband had died, Beth described everything as if she had seen it all unfold. It felt as though my late husband was speaking through her. I came to realize Beth's mysterious power was undeniably real. You succeeded in killing my husband, but you had another problem, didn't you? His body wasn't found right away as you'd expected. As days passed without the discovery of his body, Brian grew increasingly desperate. Hounded by debt collectors, he was quickly losing his composure. Then came the news from the police about the discovery of a body in the mountains resembling my husband. You took advantage of that poor man, didn't you? Kelly, standing beside me, turned to Brian.
Is that why you told me not to look at him? So I wouldn't realize it wasn't my dad?
Our relentless questioning left Brian and Kathy frozen in place, their faces pale as death. Yet they still refused to admit anything.
This is all baseless. A journal like that isn't proof of anything. Besides, this story about me pushing him off a cliff is nothing but your wild imagination.
Exactly. Maybe my brother fancied himself a novelist. That journal's probably just a draft for one of his ideas.
Yeah, and Beth's weird comments must be some inherited nonsense from her grandfather.
I realized reasoning with them was futile. Oh, so you're not going to admit it? Fine. I decided to shift my approach. Then how do you explain the car that nearly hit Beth and me on the way back from preschool? The two seemed to relax slightly, thinking I had given up.
That sounds dangerous. You really should be more careful, Maria. You're not as young as you used to be.
Exactly. If Beth got hurt, it'd be a disaster. You need to pay more attention.
They exchanged smug looks and laughed mockingly at me. I wasn't careless. That car was targeting us. I'm certain of it. And I clearly saw the faces of the people in the car.
Oh? Did you recognize them?
Feigning indifference, Brian smirked. I pointed at him. You were in the driver's seat. Kathy was in the passenger seat. Though momentarily flustered, Brian quickly burst into laughter.
You must have been mistaken. Right, Kathy?
Kathy, her face contorted, nodded vigorously. Ignoring them, I pulled out a voice recorder and pressed play.
That old hag gone?
Yeah, finally. She's such a nuisance.
The recording continued, delving into horrifying territory.
We missed the old hag and Beth today, but next time, we'll finish the job.
That's right. The night I went to Kathy's diner was the same night I was almost hit by a car. While Kathy wasn't looking, I secretly planted a listening device. Her restaurant also doubled as her residence, so I suspected Brian might be there. I pretended to leave but stayed within range to listen. Sure enough, Brian joined Kathy after she closed the restaurant. As the two drank, their true nature emerged.
That brat Beth keeps saying weird stuff. She's causing us extra trouble.
I was shocked too. I'd heard about the family's supposed mysterious powers from my brother, but I never thought they were real.
No matter. I've already blown through the inheritance Kelly got from her father. Next, it's the old hag's turn. She's probably sitting on a fortune, and selling their house would fetch a good amount too.
The two clinked glasses, laughing. And then, they began discussing something so horrifying that it was unbearable to hear. The reason my son-in-law was kind to me after I lost my husband was to keep an eye on me, ensuring I wouldn't uncover the truth behind my husband's death. He was also after the inheritance I received from my late husband. Moreover, Brian had taken out a life insurance policy on young Beth, and he had his eyes on that money as well.
Hey, instead of running her over with a car, don't you think it'd be better to make it look like an accident, like with my brother?
Yeah, maybe this time we'll do it in the mountains so she's found quickly.
Realizing they hadn't given up, I was overwhelmed with terror and couldn't stop trembling.
Once those two are taken care of, Kelly is next. I've got a hefty insurance policy on her, too.
Hey, don't forget about my new diner once it's all done, okay?
The two of them, unaware that I had seen their faces, began scheming more vile plans. To think they would target not only my granddaughter but now my daughter as well. I couldn't suppress my anger.
Yeah, I know. Of course.
Oh, I'm so happy. Brian, I just love you so much.
Hey, cut it out. Not here. Let's go to the bed in the back.
No way. I can't wait.
Hey, stop. Not here. Ugh, you adorable little.
After that, the horrifying noises and grotesque screams that followed were utterly unimaginable from the menacing conversation they had just been having. Overwhelmed by rage, I stopped the recorder. The truth fully exposed, my son-in-law and sister-in-law turned pale once again, trembling uncontrollably.
Wiretapping is a crime.
He shouted as he lunged to grab the voice recorder from me, but I swiftly dodged his reach. It might be a crime, but it's far lighter than the ones you've committed.
Shut up. Hand it over right now.
Humph, who would hand over such crucial evidence?
Damn it, then I'll finish you and Kelly off right here.
Brian yelled something incoherent and exchanged a glance with Kathy. Suddenly, the two lunged at me, pinning me from behind in a tight hold. Stop it. You're Beth's father. Don't make us more disappointed in you than we already are.
Shut up! I've already done one, and I'm not scared of anything anymore.
Exactly. You should have just died when we ran you over.
Brian tightened his hands around my throat while Kathy restrained my arms and legs with all her strength. But then, in the distance, the sound of police sirens grew louder.
No, this can't be.
What the? Why?
I managed to free myself from Brian's grip, and the two turned to each other, their faces etched with panic and confusion. Too bad for you. I've been one step ahead of you this entire time. I had Kelly call the police when I saw an opening. I smirked and retrieved my smartphone from Kelly, who had been holding it for me. I wanted to hear the truth from your mouths, even though the evidence I gathered from the wiretap was enough. With my daughter's help, I had secretly recorded the entire exchange on my smartphone. Now there's no escape. You'll pay for taking my husband's life and for plotting to eliminate me and Beth. And I'll make sure you repay every penny of my husband's stolen money.
Please forgive me.
With no escape left, Brian collapsed to his knees, groveling on the ground.
I'm so sorry.
She knelt beside him, pressing her forehead against the dirt.
At the time, the company was struggling. I just gave in to temptation.
I was deceived by Brian. I never thought he'd really take my brother's life.
What? Don't you dare pin this all on me. You're the one who seduced me in the first place.
You made the first move. Don't blame me. I didn't realize how useless you were until it was too late.
Even in the face of their downfall, they began bickering shamelessly, completely forgetting the severity of their situation. Kelly and I let out a deep sigh, utterly disgusted by their despicable behavior. You two are perfect for each other. Enjoy your time together in hell. Moments later, the police arrived and arrested the pair. They wailed and protested as they were dragged into the police car. I handed over all the evidence, bringing the case to a close. Finally, with my daughter and granddaughter by my side, I went to bring my husband home. In the days that followed, Brian and Kathy were formally charged with the murder of my husband and the attempted harm against Beth and me. There is no doubt they will face severe punishment for their crimes. Thanks to the DNA test, the identity of the man who had been buried in my husband's place was also discovered. I was relieved to hear that he was returned to his real family. Through our lawyer, my daughter filed for divorce, requesting $30,000 in alimony and $100,000 in child support. She also demanded the return of the $100,000 inheritance that Brian had taken from her father. Kelly decided to take over Brian's business operations. The managers of the various stores have welcomed her with open arms, and she is off to a promising start. Meanwhile, Beth has started sharing more about the strange things she sees with me. According to her, we now have a fairy living in our home. Perhaps it's thanks to this benevolent spirit, but life for the three of us, myself, Kelly, and Beth, has become joyful and fulfilling. How did you enjoy today's story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.